Hi, Reshma.
Hi.
Good evening. I just want to tell all the audience that Anupam sir will be joining in a little late because he couldn't join in because of some commitment that he had. So I would like to introduce Reshma Nayyar, our speaker today. I'm Rashmi Ail, and I'm the project coordinator for the CSMVS Museum Art Conservation Center. And I would like to thank the Italian Cultural Center and the CSMVS and the Conservat project, City India, for helping us with this. And Reshma, you can please take over. Anupam sir will join in later for the questions. Yeah, thank you.
So, great. Then I'll just begin. I'll share my screen and start. Okay. Just one moment. Nishmi, if you can just confirm to me that you can see my screen.
Yes, I can, Reshma.
Okay. And the slideshow has begun. So you can see that.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So good evening, everybody. And thank you for joining us. Today's talk is on a series of 9 very large canvases by Andrea Mantegna. These canvases are called today the Triumphs of Caesar. And the image you're looking at on the screen right now is the 9th of the 9 canvases. And you see Caesar seated here at upper right, and he holds in his left hand a palm of victory. Behind him, there is a figure who has been identified as the genius of Caesar. So that would be a spirit personification of Caesar, who holds above Caesar's head a laurel wreath with which he's being crowned as a victor, or the triumphator, the triumphant general. So the Triumphs of Caesar, this title is a little misleading, and I just get to it right away. Ideally, the series of 9 canvases, so this is an image I found on the net. These canvases are all in the Royal Collection at Hampton Court Palace, and this is how they're displayed over there. So you can see 8 of them. So if you count from left to right, this is the 8th, and to the right, beyond the screen that we can see right now, you would have the 9th canvas. That's the image we were just looking at. So that's Caesar on a chariot. So these 9 canvases were meant to be viewed, it's presumed, together, and they depict a single triumphal procession. And that's the reason, more accurately, it should be called the Triumph of Caesar rather than the plural triumphs. All right, another image that gives you a sense of this is the rightmost images here, and the rest of them. This gives you a sense of how they might have been displayed. It's very unusual that this series of paintings, enormous as it is, and each canvas is about 8.5 by 9 feet. Okay, so really enormous. Took several years for Mantegna to produce the entire series, and not much documentation survives about the commission, in the sense we don't know who his advisors might have been, who helped him interpret texts to come up with the imagery that he has painted. We don't know where exactly these were displayed. We do know where he created them. There was a room given to him to use as a studio, because these canvases were way too large for him to work on in his own studio at home. Now, Mantegna was the court artist to the Gonzaga, and the patron for these canvases is likely to have been the Marquis Francesco II. I'll come to that shortly because, or rather, let me just talk about that right now. Mantegna was invited to Mantua by Marchese or Marquis Ludovico II Gonzaga. Okay, Mantegna wasn't 100% sure whether he ought to go or not, but eventually he accepted the invitation. He went and he became the official court artist to the Gonzaga, and he worked for several generations of the Gonzaga rulers. So starting with Ludovico II, his son Federico, his grandson Francesco, and his great-grandson Federico II. Okay, so Mantegna had a long and illustrious career, a major part of which was spent in the court of the Gonzaga. As court artist to the Gonzaga, Mantegna was in charge of much more than just creating paintings. He was also in charge of overseeing and designing decorations for pageantry, festivities, and costumes for the Duke's household. As a result, when we look at the imagery in these 9 canvases by Mantegna, we need to keep in mind that there's something very unusual in them. You don't see any Gonzaga devices, or rather any imagery that would connect the triumphal procession, the spoils of war, the wealth, the power with the patrons. And this is a question that has not been satisfactorily answered in scholarship, because if you know anything about art created by powerful patrons, it's a given that there will be references to themselves within the artworks, and especially in the Renaissance, and especially in the court of the Gonzaga, who were very erudite and very powerful rulers, even if they ruled a smaller area. Okay, now I have outlined in yellow the 7th of these canvases, simply because that is the one that has been greatly reworked. So the image you see follows Mantegna's you could say his composition and supposedly his coloring too, but the overpainting is so much that it is the least autograph, if you will, in terms of the finish. Okay, the dimensions, as I mentioned, about almost 9 feet by 9 feet, each of them. So the combined width is approximately 80 feet. And in these 2 images, you get a sense of how large that would be. The figures you see are practically, for all purposes, life size. And as I mentioned, we don't have documentation telling us where these canvases were meant to be displayed, where they were actually displayed. We do have records of important people going to see these canvases, along with Mantegna's Camera degli Sposi, the reception room in the Ducal Palace. These canvases were his most well-known works. So these were must-see objects of art for important visitors to Mantua. Just one moment. Excuse me. Now, a little about the history of the Gonzaga family, just to give you an idea of why this subject of the triumphs of Caesar would appeal to them. So they seized power in the 14th century, and the first Gonzaga ruler of Mantua had the rank of captain, capitano. Okay. Eventually, they were allied with the Holy Roman Emperor, who gave them the rank, the family, the ruler, the rank of marquis. Okay. And eventually, in the 16th century, they were elevated to the rank of duke. The three possible Gonzaga patrons that for this series of canvases were all of the rank of marquis. Okay, so Ludovico II, the patron of the Camera degli Sposi. On the left, you have a photograph of the interior of this fictive decoration of the reception room in the ducal palace, which has an opening, or rather, it's not a real opening, it's a painted fictive oculus that appears to be open to the sky. And in the architectural decoration surrounding it, you have 8 roundels with 8 busts of Caesars. Okay, each of these busts is named. There is an inscription identifying the Caesar in it. So, you know, Augustus, Julius Caesar, I think Tiberius, and so on. This panel that you see here between the window and the door has a portrait of the patron of the Camera degli Sposi. That's Marquis Ludovico II, his son, his other sons, and his grandsons. So I don't know which of the younger sons and grandsons might be which figure, but in this family portrait, you have the possible patrons. So Marquis Ludovico II, his son Federico, and his grandson Francesco. Amongst them, one of them was the patron of these the 9 canvases that I'm going to be talking about today. Now, very quickly, to give you a sense of how important the subject was to these very humanist, scholarly, but equally militaristic rulers of Mantua, we're going to look at these works commissioned by them. So this, on the left, you have the obverse and the reverse of a medal commemorating Ludovico II Gonzaga. You see he is in armor, and here he is also in armor on horseback, and there are Gonzaga devices of the sun, and I don't remember which flower this is, but I have to assume it's a Gonzaga heraldic device. Okay. In the center, you have a painting that was commissioned much later, but it commemorates the son of Ludovico, that's Francesco Gonzaga, as a warrior in battle. Okay. And to the right, you have a painting by Mantegna, which commemorates Ludovico's grandson. Excuse me, Federico was his son, Francesco II is his grandson. So Francesco, and Francesco is this figure that you see kneeling at the lower left, at the foot of the Virgin's throne. And I'm just going to zoom in. You see he's in armor. Okay, and he looks up, the Virgin is blessing him, the Christ child is blessing him. So all of these artworks attest to their roles as military rulers. Okay? Now, when we come to the figure of Julius Caesar, okay? So Julius Caesar was included. This is a detail of from the ceiling of the Camera degli Sposi, and you can see Julius Caesar, so Julius Caesar. And Caesar was not actually an emperor, right? He was, or rather, let me clarify that. Julius Caesar was a general in Republican Rome, okay? And the Senate of Rome had the authority to confer as a temporary title, the title Imperator, Emperor, on generals who had won important military victories. And that title, Imperator, would be awarded to a victorious general and would be valid until the time that the general returned to Rome and had a triumphal procession. So it was a temporary title. Okay? Now, Caesar at some point was also conferred that title for life, and the Roman Empire was set up with Augustus, who was the successor to Caesar. But Caesar appears in this cycle of emperors. Now, coming to the subject of the 9 canvases painted by Mantegna. Okay. I told you that it represents, the 9 canvases together represent a single triumphal procession, and the 9th one has the figure of Caesar. So I just zoom in on that so that it's that's over here. So this is the figure of Caesar. Excuse me just a moment. Okay. Mantegna referred to various textual sources and visual sources to come up with his compositions for these canvases. Okay? There is no direct visual source that he could have used for a triumphal procession. Okay, there are certain, he might have seen coins, relief sculptures, triumphal arches, and he gleaned from those different visual sources what he could, and he used textual sources to devise an extremely innovative composition for these 9 canvases. Okay? So Mantegna's representation of a Roman triumphal procession is, in its way, an original source for artists and scholars during the Renaissance and thereafter in reimagining what an ancient Roman triumphal procession might have looked like. I'll come back to this a little later. Okay. Some of the textual sources that Mantegna would have consulted, and let me just qualify that. When I say Mantegna would have consulted, it doesn't mean Mantegna went and read the sources himself. They were probably humanists in the court with whom he consulted and then arrived at his compositions. So one of the most important of the sources is a biography of Caesar by Suetonius. Okay? Then there's a life of Caesar by Plutarch, and also a life of a different Roman general called Emilius Paulus, also by Plutarch, which has a description of Roman triumph, from which Mantegna has drawn various elements in these canvases. In addition to this, there are other sources like Livy, who was a scholar, ancient scholar from Mantua, as well as others like Appian, from whose works certain elements might be derived. Okay, excuse me, just one second. Excuse me. So one interesting composition worth mentioning is this engraving that you see here at the, just one moment. Okay, this engraving you see at the bottom is after a drawing by Mantegna. So the engraving is reversed. The little square you see over here with the red outline is a reversed image of the engraving, which more or less would give us the appearance of the drawing. Okay. Now, this drawing is called the Senators. Okay? And there is reason, there's good reason to believe that this might have been, I'm using a lot of qualifiers, I know, that this might have been the subject of a 10th canvas that would have followed the canvas with Caesar on the triumphal chariot. Okay. At the same time, there is reason to believe that it was not, or rather, I'm not going to comment on that. The 10th canvas was never executed. Whether it was meant to be executed or not, I'm not going to comment on. But there's a possibility that this would have been the composition of the, or would have been a starting composition for a 10th canvas. Okay. Now, when we talk about Roman triumphs, the most visible symbols of Roman military triumphs are the Roman triumphal arches that exist even today in Rome and other parts of Italy, as well as other former Roman colonies. And the photograph you're looking at is the Art of Titus in Rome. The panel that you see here is the companion panel to this one. So it's the interior of this right, I'm going to say the right side of the Arch of Titus. Okay? So here are two photographs of these two facing panels. On the left, you see the triumphal chariot and a procession. You see spears of the soldiers. And what I want you to note over here is how schematic, in a way, the arrangement of the horses and the soldiers is. They're lined up almost like not a military procession, but like a military alignment, if you will. On the right, you have a rather badly preserved panel, but very important because it commemorates one of the most significant historical events in ancient Rome, the sack of the Temple of Jerusalem. So these are Roman soldiers carrying away the prized possessions from the Temple of Jerusalem, the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, including the menorah from the Sanctum Sanctorum. Now, I want you to note some of the details over here. So the soldiers are carrying something like a stretcher on their shoulders on which the menorah is placed. They also they hold trumpets and they carry banners. Here, something like ansate tablets, so tablets with these dovetailed handles and trumpets. So we'll see some of these elements recurring in Mantegna's canvases. One other thing I wanted to point out. Oh yes, it's not. It's the terminology. So these are images of spoils of war. Okay, so these items that are being the most important is the menorah over here. It's a symbol of the spoils of war, the riches, the treasures, the symbolic, the articles of symbolic and monetary importance from whichever city or people has been conquered, that are being brought back in a triumphal procession to Rome. Okay, now beginning with the canvases by Mantegna. So this is the first of the 9, and you see trumpets, other kinds of spoils, and you see these painted views of cities, including siege equipment. So these large wooden machines with which the Roman army laid siege to the different cities. Okay? Note the way the figures are positioned. Okay? They are parallel to the picture plane, and to the left, the trumpeters and the spear and standard bearers are walking towards the left. This figure turns back, and this figure has stopped and is looking back. So in a way, the movement is from right to left, but within the canvas, there are elements which guide us, the viewers, to look towards the next canvas. So that's canvas number 2. And that is this figure who looks back, who is walking to the left, but turning to look back. This figure doing the same thing. And this figure with his back to us, actually looking to the right. So all these are visual cues to us to look at the next canvas. So I'm going to move on to the next canvas. I forgot I had this close up. This is what I wanted to show you, the siege equipment. The next canvas, and just note how there is no real fluid merging of the backgrounds from one canvas to another. So this is an indication. Let me just go back to the, if you look at the overall backgrounds, they do not merge into each other. And this is an indication that the canvases were not meant to be placed immediately one after the other. There was going to be some kind of gap between them. So whether they were hung in a corridor or in a room along the walls, we can reasonably expect that there would have been some kind of decorative element that would have separated them. Okay, so our the contemporary viewer would have looked at each canvas by itself and moved sequentially to the next one. Okay. Now, the second of the two canvases has these very large sculptures, and in Plutarch, there is actually a reference to colossi, colossal statues. Okay, so here you have a representation of the kind of colossal statue that would be carried back as a spoil of war. And along with that, you see over here, let me just mark that up. So if you look at the shape of this banner, you see this is it's basically the same shape of the banner that you've seen here and here. Okay, a very it's the norm in representations of triumphal processions. Just one moment. Okay, the inscription over here refers to Julius Caesar as emperor. Okay, and it refers to his Gallic triumph, the triumph over the Gauls. Having said that, as we go through the canvases, you will see that there are Mantegna has taken elements from different triumphs of Caesar, not just the description of his Gallic triumph, but also other triumphs, and also triumphs not of Caesar, but of others, to create this imagined triumphal procession which honors Julius Caesar. Okay. There some of the siege equipment that you see here, and the upper right over here, just one moment. Okay, so you see helmets and spears. I will come back to this very shortly. The other important element I want you to note for now is this representation of a female bust with, as its crown, the walls of a city. So let me just zoom in on that so you can see it. So there's a female bust and she wears a crown which is in the shape of city walls. Okay? Here's another soldier carrying a sculpture, more of the spoils of war. Okay. The bust that I asked you to look at is the bust of Sybil. Okay, Sybil was a mother goddess, not in Gaul, but in the ancient Near East. So here you have a good example of Mantegna having an inscription in the painting talking about the Gallic triumph of Caesar, but the spoils themselves are not related to the Gauls. So it is more of a to put it rather indelicately, it's a mix, an eclectic mix of different imagery related to triumphs put together to create this really enormous series of paintings. Okay, the next canvas has more of the armor. So if you look up here, you see armor and spears. So the soldiers have been killed, the defeated soldiers, their armor and their weaponry is being transported in the triumphal procession as a symbol of victory over the dead soldiers. Now, there's something really important over here. Oh, yes, one more thing before I forget. So if you look at this really large vase with what I have to assume are lots of coins, silver or gold coins, again, being carried on a kind of a stretcher. And here you have a shield. Over here, more of a helmet. So in the description, in the biography of Caesar by Plutarch, Plutarch mentions that the triumphal procession included the weaponry and the armor of the defeated soldiers, purposely arranged in a way that looked very haphazard and in a way that was relatively loose, so that as the procession moved forward, those pieces of metal would bang against each other and create a noise. Okay, so that noise was meant to have an impact on the people of Rome who were observing the triumphal procession. Okay, another point worth noting is that the celebration of triumphs in the Renaissance was part of pageantry. So you can imagine that the Gonzaga patrons of these paintings themselves would have had such processions, and Mantegna would have been in charge of overseeing the decorations, the costumes, and so on. The quality of, or rather the tone of the triumphal procession in the Renaissance was usually one of celebration. Okay, it's very unusual in that sense that the tone of Mantegna's series of 9 paintings is not that celebratory type. So when you look at it, there's not joy and exuberance. It is a very beautifully executed, composed and executed series of paintings, but it does not convey joy and exuberance. Okay, and the reason for that has plausibly been suggested as Mantegna's use of Plutarch's text in Greek, because Plutarch was very clear that republican triumphs were about ensuring that the the terrifying, fearful aspect of war was communicated to the observers rather than the joys of triumph. Okay, so this overall somber tone of Mantegna's series is derived from Plutarch. Okay. Having said that, we're also going to see now that there are other sources from which Mantegna took different elements of the painting. Okay, so the next canvas, in this you have soldiers. Here there's a soldier carrying an enormous urn. Okay. There's another very large vase filled with coins being carried on this beer-like stretcher thing. And there are trumpeters with inscriptions of inscribed banners celebrating Caesar. In addition to that, you have oxen who are basically garlanded and wearing triangular hat-like structures, for want of a better word. Okay. Now, these specific elements, the oxen being white in color, and the use of these triangular headpieces, which are called mitrae, come from specific sources. So Plutarch describes the mitrae in the triumphs. Appian describes the oxen as being white. Plutarch also talks about the garlands that the oxen wear. Okay. And yeah, I think that's it for this. Let me just move on. The next canvas has elephants in it. So you have the oxen. Oops, excuse me. You have an ox here again with the mitra and several elephants. Now the elephants are not exactly in the correct proportion, but there is a feature in the elephants that comes from Suetonius's biography of Caesar. So in Suetonius's biography, he describes the elephants carrying torches on their backs. So you see that over here. And so let me just zoom in. Here, the flames of the torches, and these torches are all borne on the backs of the elephants. Right? So this is from a different source than Plutarch. This is from Suetonius. The next canvas has a slightly different angle, or rather, I'm going to say, not an angle, a different movement, path of movement to it. So if you look at the previous ones, they're all more or less heading from right to left, more or less parallel to the picture plane. But when you look at this canvas, the procession seems to be heading from left to right and then heading away from the, I'm sorry, from right to left. And at left, it's not walking, they're not walking parallel to the picture plane, but they seem to be turning inwards. Okay. I would think, I don't know, and there's no way of knowing, but it is a possibility that this canvas might have been placed at a position, let's say if it were in a corridor, where the corridor would then turn right and the remaining canvases would be along the right wall. So this would be on the right wall of a corridor, at the leftmost edge where it would turn right. Let me just try and draw that because I'm not sure how clear that was. Okay, so if you, oops, excuse me, one second. So let's assume the canvases are placed on the in a corridor like this. This canvas might have been placed here because the movement seems to be going inwards. It's just a theory. I have no way of knowing whether this is right or I'm just talking through my hat, but it seems like this could be a possibility. Okay. Note over here, not just the spoils of war are not just sculptures and you know, coins full of, or rather vases full of coins. So there is that too. So you have the vase full of coins, you have a lot of tableware, and you have what looks like jewelry over here. Okay. In addition to, of course, the armor and the weapons, which have been arranged, as I mentioned, in a manner that would make noise to evoke the sounds of war. So one other thing that I forgot to mention is that Plutarch's description of the triumphs talks about the trumpeters when they're playing the trumpets in the triumphal procession. The sounds they're playing are not music. It's not festive trumpeting. It is the sounds of war. It's the kind of militaristic trumpeting that would have been done in war. So it seems more than likely, looking at the somber tone of Mantegna's canvases, that what he's representing is Plutarch's description to a large extent, including the trumpeting of the musicians. Okay, this is the yellow outlined canvas, which has been reworked quite significantly. So I'll just focus on the overall composition and then move on. So over here, you have the conquered peoples, and it's very interesting. This helmeted figure you see here is might be a portrait of a Macedonian general called Perseus, who was defeated not by Julius Caesar, but another Roman consul, Emilius Paulus. So this would be his family and the others. And behind this window, the people you see are not prisoners. They're the Roman people watching the triumph. That's what is being depicted. And amongst the family members of the defeated ruler are this woman with a nursing child and this little child who's raising his leg to show his mother that he has a thorn. And this was highly praised by one of the 16th century art historians, Giorgio Vasari, when he saw this canvas. As I mentioned, this has been heavily overpainted. So it follows Mantegna's composition, but it's not autograph Mantegna at this point. Okay, almost at the last canvas. And here there are more musical instruments, and the pace of the procession seems to slow down over here. It is not so until here we're moving right to left. Here it's slow, it's the captives. Here most of the figures are standing. They seem to be moving, but not too much. Notice how the soldiers are carrying these busts of Sybil as spoils of war. They have other banners, and the figure at the extreme right is looking back. The last canvas to which this figure is looking back is the canvas with Caesar on it. Now, the canvas with Caesar, so Caesar is on a triumphal chariot. In the background, you see a Roman triumphal arch, which has its own sculptures on it that refer to other victories of the Romans, because the Roman arches very often were decorated with spoliated sculptures that had been brought back from as spoils of war and were placed on the arches. Okay, the figure over here behind Caesar, so Caesar holds in his left hand an enormous palm of victory, and the figure behind him appears to be crowning him with a laurel wreath, again a victor's wreath. And this figure sort of looks back. Now, let me just go ahead very quickly and put it in relation with the engraving we looked at earlier, which is after a drawing by Mantegna called The Senators. So in one of the descriptions of Caesar's triumphs, the sequence that was given included, after Caesar himself, all the senators walking. So the triumphal procession did not just end with Caesar. After Caesar, they were the senators. And that's why it is a plausible theory that this drawing of Mantegna's was for a 10th canvas that was not made. Okay. So to sum up, 9 canvases by Andrea Mantegna for the Gonzaga family of Mantua. These 9 canvases together are called the Triumphs of Caesar. They are more accurately called the Triumph of Caesar because they represent a single triumphal procession. But that single triumphal procession is not exactly one historical procession. It is Mantegna's conception of a triumphal procession, for which he drew on various sources, including several primary sources in Greek, the most important of which were Plutarch and Suetonius. And the backgrounds not being, not merging with one another suggests very strongly that this Mantegna's goal was not to recreate, or I won't say suggest very strongly, we know that his goal was not to recreate a specific triumphal procession as much as to convey the solemn importance of a Roman triumphal procession. And unlike many of the triumphal processions, unlike the way triumphal processions were perceived in the Renaissance, Mantegna's compositions derived from Plutarch, which has a very somber tone to it. Okay, with that, I finish, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Reshma. We are ready to take questions now. So if there are any questions by the audience, you can please put them in the chat box, or you can also raise your hand and we can give you permission to talk, and you can ask Reshma your question yourself.
In fact, I should share my screen again.
Sure.
No questions?
Just waiting if anyone has any questions.
Okay. I think I see a Q&A. Let me just look at that. Oh, and this is a very simple. SPQR is Latin for Senatus Populusque Romanus, the Senate and the people of Rome. So SPQR is a basically short form to say this is public property, or it belongs to the government, if you will. It belongs to the Senate and the people of Rome. And you'll actually find it even today in Rome all over the place. Where was the set of 9 canvases originally located or displayed? So we don't know. We know that these were commissioned by the Gonzaga. They were very highly prized, and they were so a lot of important visitors went to see them, but we don't exactly know where they were displayed and where originally or eventually. And why did they carry the Sybil? The Sybil is a symbol of conquest because it's a mother goddess from one of the lands that the Romans conquered. So it's being brought back as the spoils of war, just as the other sculptures, just as the vases with the coins. How common is it to not know where? Well, during the Renaissance, it's actually not common. Things are so well documented, we usually know, especially for something as large as this. It's rather unusual not to know. The prisoners of war, would they go on to become slaves? Now, is that question about in ancient Rome or in the Renaissance? And the answer is probably yes to both, but don't, that's not my expertise. So I'm going to pass on that question. In ancient Rome, definitely yes, slaves. That's how they built most of their very large walls and monuments on labor of slaves. You're welcome. Okay, is there something in the... What is the reason that painting number 7 is heavily repainted? I don't know. I assume it was damaged and whoever owned it decided to have it repainted. So there are accounts of prisoners being treated. Is it the Christian times of minimalism which that is avoided? Okay, I'm looking at this image. There are accounts of prisoners being treated harsh and also executed at the end of triumph. So Caesar was pre-Christianity. Caesar. Yeah, so I don't know. And is the Christian Mantegna's painting was definitely in Christian times. So I'm not sure I understand this question. They're at Hampton Court Palace. Yes, SPQR is everywhere in Rome. You'll find it everywhere.
Hello.
Yeah.
Sorry, the question I meant was like in the actual accounts of triumph, there are like the prisoners of war are being executed and they're treated harshly. So,
Yes.
I mean, because of the painting being done in the Christian era, was this not shown?
I don't think that's the case. Mantegna has just chosen to, what he's depicting is, it's a very literate, humanist kind of painting. Let me just think about this, how I want to answer this. I know the answer, but I don't think I'm doing a good job explaining it to you. So prisoners of war were not treated well. They were not even treated well in the Renaissance. Okay, a lot of the condottieri, the mercenary generals like Gonzaga and his contemporaries, were absolutely ruthless in war. Okay, so it's not like they were cultured princes, but they were also ruthless generals. Okay, what they project in their paintings, it's propaganda. So I'm just going to answer it by saying, answer your question by saying that what Mantegna is conveying is a very whitewashed and very erudite interpretation of our triumphal procession. Okay.
Yeah. Also, the second one, like the
Just
triumphal.
one sec. There's a plane. I can't hear. One sec. Yes.
Yeah. So the triumphant general was treated like Jupiter himself, right? We don't see any pagan symbols in the painting at all. Was it also because of the like prevalence of Christianity?
So, okay. So there's a two-part answer to that. This series of canvases is actually unusual because there are no real Christian symbols in it. It's full of pagan symbols. And if you think of the way Caesar is seated, just one second, let me. So he is almost enthroned, he is elevated, so he is most godlike. And if I'm not mistaken, there's actually an inscription. One of the inscriptions refers to him as Divo or Divus. Just one, let me see if I can find it. One moment. Look at this, Divo Julio Cesare. Okay, so I don't know exactly what it means, but this is Mantegna adding it because the Romans, the ancient Romans, would often deify the emperors after they died. So there would be a temple to the divine Augustus, temple to, you know, Tiberius after the emperors died. So this is Mantegna referencing that. But there's no Christian imagery in this. There's no Gonzaga imagery. It's pagan imagery. All of it is pagan. Oops. How accurate would the face of Julius Caesar be? We know that Mantegna looked very closely at coins. We know there were lots of coins with Caesar's profile, so you can expect it to be reasonably accurate of the Caesar type. Would I have insights on the colors used across the panels? I know it was tempera. I'm sorry, I can't answer that question, but that should, I guess if you read a book on Mantegna with that question should be easily answerable. So Caesar never really got along with the Senate. Perhaps one of the reasons the 10th painting never made it. No, because this was not made in ancient Rome. This was made 1500, 1400 years later. So it has nothing to do with that. Did Andrea Mantegna sign or have a particular orthographic element that has... So Mantegna, has included his portrait in a painting in the Camera Picta. He has, I think, in one of his canvases, he has an inscribed signature. But his style and his work is documented, and so specific to him that I don't think it's difficult to attribute works to him in general, because they're mostly well documented. Why do I say it's not celebratory? Okay, just one sec. Let me just go to a different image and we'll look at it. One moment. This series of paintings celebrates a triumphal procession. It is celebratory in its subject, okay? But in its nature, it's a very muted celebration. It's not you hardly see the people of Rome celebrating. So when the military would process through Rome, the Roman people, if I'm not mistaken, I read a reference somewhere, they would dress in white, okay? And they would climb up on things so that they could see, they would create scaffoldings, they would climb on buildings, trees, everything, to be able to see as much as possible. You could imagine them cheering and yelling, howling, all of that. In these paintings, the only representation of the Roman people is this, other than the soldiers and the captives in the procession. Okay, this is the common people. When I say the tone of this painting is not celebratory, what I mean is Mantegna has selected as his source Plutarch, who very explicitly says that the trumpeters in the triumphs do not go around blaring, happy tunes to which people would dance in the streets. It is the kind of trumpeting that would be done in the war itself. The sounds of all the weapons and the armor, the way they are loosely tied together so that they clang against each other, is supposed to be evoke the terrifying aspect of war. So this is very different to, if you think of a triumphal procession, the kind of procession that you might have actually had in Mantua, in Florence, during pageants, would have been full of joy. It would be so that the people could, participate in it, have a lot of fun. Think of big festivals, right? When you're in the streets, you're cheering a sports team or something like that. The tone of this is very different. That's why I said that. That's what I meant when I said the tone is not, it's not primarily celebratory, it's primarily somber. Okay, I think I've answered the questions. I don't see any others. I can't hear. Am I the only one who can't hear?
No, Rashmi, we can't hear you.
Okay.
No, still can't hear you.
Maybe you could type and I could read it.
No, still can't hear you.
Rashmi, maybe you could type into the chat or the Q&A and I can read it. Okay, I guess at this point, if anybody has any questions, just put it into the Q&A. I've got the wrong one open. Was it supposed to be evening time in the Triumph procession? I don't know the answer to this. Okay, I guess at this point, since there are no more questions, we can end. Samiksha?
Should we just wait 1 second?
Okay,
If
sure.
Rashmi,
Yeah.
she's
Okay.
just back on call.
Okay, sure.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thankfully. Thank you so very much, Reshma, for a wonderful lecture. As usual, we thoroughly enjoyed it. And we really look forward to your 4th of Feb lecture, which is going to be on Michelangelo's Pieta. I'm sure the audience is also waiting for that. So I would like to thank Italian Cultural Center, CSMVS, and City India for their support in conducting these lectures. And thank you very much, audience, for being such a wonderful audience. And I apologize that Anupam sir couldn't join us today because he had some urgent meeting. So look forward to seeing all of you all for the next lecture, and have a good weekend. Thanks a lot, Reshma and Samiksha, for all your support. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.